So what I'm going to do right now is give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. We've got Stan Mitchell, Kylash Ramesh, and Steve Smith. Steve, I'd like you to start with your 60-second elevator pitch. Who you are, how you got here, and we'll move from there.
I'm Steve Smith. I'm the Director of Physical IT Network for Arvest Bank. Physical IT Network means everything on literally the physical side. So I have data center operations, rack and stack, structured cabling. Also home office, campus facility management for a campus that stretches across 2 states, and all structured cabling, generator, and UPS operations for the entire bank group, which is in 4 states. I wound up here because Wendy called. That's what Wendy does. We love Wendy. She's an awesome person, but she called and asked me to be here. I've spoken before at this event and others, and I always enjoy the interaction, the opportunity to get in front of people and talk about facility management and the challenges we face.
Thanks, Stephen. Checks in the mail. Stan Mitchell, I'd like to have give the floor to you right now.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see I'm not the only one that gets up at this silly hour in the morning for a conference event. My name's Stan Mitchell. As you may gather from the accent, I'm not from the US. I'm still actually based in Scotland, at least that's the theory. I'm the CEO of a company called Key Facilities Management, and we are the longest established FM company in the UK. And I spend most of my life traveling, unfortunately. A lot of our work takes place in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. And we are active in about 20 countries. So some of the questions that we're talking about today, I guess I can bring a different perspective to it in terms of some of the nuances and cultural challenges when you're trying to achieve some of these influences to top management. So I've been in FM for over 30 years, so I like to think I know a little bit, and I'm happy to share what I do know with you today.
Thank you, Stan. Kylash, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kylash Ramesh. I'm a federal employee at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. For those of you that don't know, NIH is a sister organization like the FDA or the CDC. We do a lot of biomedical research, so we've got a lot of labs in animal environments in our facilities, as well as a 3.5 million square foot hospital. So I'm part of the facility management division at NIH, and I started off at the procurement and contract and financial group. I'm now on the engineering and software and IT side of things, and currently I'm involved with transitioning away from our legacy CMMS into an interim system and then into a more long-term solution. We're also starting to implement somewhat of an asset management policy and a data turnover process from construction projects. So I'm project managing both of those things, and it's a massive organizational transformation that requires a lot of buy-in from management. So what we're talking about here will really align with what I'm doing at work, and I'm happy that everyone's here to join us today. And as Wendy said, I think we really want a lot of participation from you guys. We'll try to elicit it on our end from you guys. But the previous speaking event I had done was a panel very similar to this in diversity in critical facilities, and we were able to get a lot of audience participation and not even just questions, but I would encourage anyone to share the current situation that they're in, that they're trying to get buy-in from management that will hopefully align with this topic as well.
The first question is, who in the room here has to talk to your C-suite on a regular basis? Great. Who has to present to a board? Maybe create some sort of formal presentation on a board? A little bit fewer hands. Who's got a capital project coming up? Yeah, that's good to see. How about dealing with an organizational transition? Maybe something like what Kylash talked about. Moving away from a legacy system, moving towards something else. All right, who's got a money conversation on the horizon? Who has to ask for money anytime soon? Yeah, my kids do too, but I don't know. They're gonna have to work on their strategy. I'm sure you guys do as well. Any other questions that you guys, as you see those hands go up, anything else more specific we want to find out about our audience today? How about you guys coming in? Anybody looking for something specific yet? Okay. Keep drinking the coffee. We're going to go on. So we're going to talk a little bit about terms of engagement. I think that's one of the things we started with. In those conversations that we're going to be having with your board, with your kids, with your employees, with the C-suite, let's talk about how those terms can change from a different perspective, whether it's the owner, the employee, or a consultant. Kind of have a little mix up there. So, Stan, I think you kind of jumped in first, talking a little bit about the perspective that you might bring to those kind of conversations. Would you like to jump in there when it comes to the communication side?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been on both sides of the fence. I actually worked for an American corporation in the early years of my career in FM. And we were very fortunate. We had a very forward-looking CEO in that organization who was a very open-minded. I'm talking about over 20 years ago. In fact, I'm talking about 30 years ago. Nobody had an office in that building. 30 years ago, that was quite an innovative approach. But he had a very open management style, and unfortunately, that's still today not the norm. So my experience in working in that corporate environment as an employee was very much one of understanding the people that I had to engage with, understanding what made them tick, understanding what made them important. And the first thing I learned in the FM role was not to go to them for whatever I wanted to achieve and talk FM. I had to learn to talk their language. So if I was talking to the finance director, I used to try to articulate what I was trying to achieve in terms of financial advantage or saving or whatever it might be. If I was talking to the operations director, I would try and talk in widgets per hour or efficiency of the production line or whatever it had to be. And I find that, when I eventually learnt that, I find that extremely effective when you're going to try and negotiate, if you like, with the C-suite. And the other thing I learnt was don't land something on people with no prior warning. When it went to the board, when I had to deliver requests to the board, I would lobby all of the other directors on the board. I would go and talk to them about getting their advice on my initiative. And then by the time my initiative landed at the board, they were all primed. And they had all had an influence in what I was presenting to them. And 9 times out of 10, it was relatively easy to achieve that objective. So it's actually a bit about common sense. It's a bit about people. It's the psychology of people. And if we just take a half step back and think that way, I think you will find it works much, much more effectively.
Thanks, Dan. Kylash, you had talked specifically about understanding where you are in the organization as you're having a conversation with somebody on the decision-making side, whether it's an employee, whether it's an owner. Maybe unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. So I thought Stan brought up a good differentiation in terms of where you're coming from when you're speaking to management. So the way I see it is you're kind of in one of two boats, and I'd like to get some feedback here. So who here is an employee that when they speak to management, they are speaking to their boss or their boss's boss? And I would assume everyone else's hands that are down are probably coming from more of a consultant external side where they're not necessarily this person that you're speaking to and trying to get their buy-in might not be your supervisor, but they're still paying your bills. And even though I want to make that differentiation between the internal and the external, to me, a lot of it comes down to the same kind of methodologies you're going to take when you're approaching this. When you're looking at your owner, which may be your supervisor, it may be the person that you're consulting for, it's really understanding their goals and what their organization is trying to achieve. Not every single organization's major goal is to improve their bottom line and ROI. I brought this up when we spoke yesterday, but sometimes software vendors will approach NIH and our facilities management group and will be really hitting on how much money we can save and how many employees that we won't need in the future. And I try to kind of change their mindset and make sure that they understand that that isn't our ultimate goal, is to really reduce our workforce as much as you might hear in politics and the media. really our goals are to, advance science and make sure our patients are safe and make sure our animals are safe and make sure our facilities are running at the most operational level. So whether you're internal or external, understanding that overlying goal that the organization is trying to head towards, and it could be several, right, is absolutely key before you even get in front of them. Because that's really what they're going to be trying to achieve. And if you start messaging down a path that's not aligned with their goals, you're going to lose them very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So we're talking a little bit now about those organizational goals, a mission. And Steve, we talked a little bit too about where your organization stands in terms of, there's a lot of consumer satisfaction that you're looking to achieve there. Talking a little bit about apps and access to data. Tell me a little bit about that kind of engagement and what that means when you're speaking to the decision makers, to management in your organization.
Sure. We have a lot of banking applications that people can access from their handheld. And let's be honest, in today's society, it's no longer a nice thing to have. It's an expectation. It's the bottom line. That is supposed to be on all the time. It's supposed to be available all the time. I should be able to log in, see my account, see my money, take care of my business with my handheld, no matter what. You can have a lot of outages. You can have a lot of things go wrong. Do not let that app go down. If you want the doors to close, that is the one thing that's going to impact. So being in line with the goals and objectives of the organization is one of the things that you must ensure that you're doing as a facility manager or even as a consultant, so that you're providing that value, that you're supporting your leadership. And when we're talking about building relationships, honestly, we're not talking about, hey, let's go play golf, let's hang out after work. The relationship that leadership wants to have with you is that they can depend on you, that they know you're planning, and you're planning on how to keep everything up. So how do you know, and question for the audience, how do you know that you are in alignment with the goals and objectives of your organization? How do you know? We have a document. It's called Facilities Alignment 2020. It's an internal catchphrase for a program we have going on right now for continuous improvement and how we plan to meet the goals and objectives of the company. And in that document, it's a simple 5-10 pages. We look at what we're doing, and we take all of the goals and objectives that the company has published that says this is what we want to do over the next 5 years, 10 years, however long your plan looks like. And you detail the things that your department is doing to support each individual goal, and the things you're doing to support each individual objective. In data center land, obviously the data center has to be on. More deeply, financial planning long term, what's going to go out of support in equipment over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years? I have a generator control panel that the operator interface device will go out of support in 2021. We've been talking about that since last year. We're going to budget for it this year. We're going to fix it next year. It will be completed before the device goes out of support. Now, what I have done here is I have not surprised my leadership. We've talked about it. They knew it was coming. They knew it was expensive, and we were able to plan for it, and it's not a budget killer, and we know the equipment's going to be up. So these are all very important facets to how your relationship with them needs to work. Nobody wants to be surprised. And we all know that. How many surprises do we get every day, right? It's never a pleasant thing. It's not something that we want to do. It happens. And as much as you try to plan, I promise you something will get by, but the more you minimize that, the more you will be respected in your position as a leader, the more leadership will be willing to listen to you when you come to them and say, I need funding for item XYZ, and here's why, and here's my plan for it. No, by the way, here's how this item, equipment, software, whatever supports are enabling of the goals and objectives of the company.
Thanks, Steve. You were talking about surprises. Rarely are they the good ones. And we talked about, we don't, as the FM, as the employee, as the consultant, don't want to be the one that causes the surprise, but sometimes we're the ones that are surprised. Stan, talk a little bit about, maybe from your perspective, how to handle those surprises as they come your way. Appropriate response, maybe some questions to ask, maybe some ways to try to hammer it out so that it doesn't happen again. Something that might have happened in your perspective that you could share.
Yeah. I was just looking at the screen where the 3 different types of engagement, types of individual that you might have to engage with. And fundamentally, I don't believe your approach to engagement and communication should be fundamentally different with any of those. For me, one of the most important skills we have in FM is communication skills. And when the surprise does come from the client or the owner or the boss or whatever, I think the first thing is, the 2 ears and one mouth, listen. Listen to the surprise, listen to the complaint, listen to the idea, whatever it might be, and then be positive. The surprises do come on a day-to-day basis when you're in the FM job, but that's kind of why we're there. So should it be a surprise all the time? No, it shouldn't, because FM is the catch-all of all the things that nobody else wants to do, typically. FM is the thing that we believe is very important, but do the people that we engage with, whether it's owners of buildings, whether it's clients, customers, department heads, whatever. So it is all about being positive. It is all about, in every negative, and I passionately believe this, in every negative there's a positive. You've just got to go and find it. And it's about a little bit of analysis. And then it's about, if it's something pretty fundamental, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to motivate your people to go and see that as an opportunity to improve what we do? Ultimately, we're a customer service business. We're a people business. Everything that we do is about people. Hence the reason that the communication skill is vitally important. And I've been a consultant for 30 years now in FM, and I don't treat my clients any different. When a client is not happy with what we've done, it's the same process. You've got to just analyze it. You've got to open the communication channels. And the most important thing, most powerful thing that I've ever found, whether when I worked in a corporation or when I work outside of my clients' organizations, is ask for help. And it's amazing if you ask people, well, if you think there's something wrong with that, help me understand what it is that you think that's wrong. Help me understand what it is that you think would be success in your mind. And it's very, very difficult for people, when you ask for help, to say no. And that's quite a powerful tool to use, whether you're inside an organization or outside an organization. So surprises for me is why we're there. We're the people that catch the curveball when it comes our way and potentially throw it back when it's required. But I think that's FM. And I think you either thrive in that environment or it's a burden and it'll wear you down very quickly. But for me, I love it. I think it's what makes life exciting, but maybe not too exciting all the time is a good idea.
Thanks, Stan. So we're talking a little bit about playing ball, which is appropriate this time of year. But we also want to talk about some transition. And we've got a couple here that the panel is experiencing right now, walking through right now. And this might be an opportunity for folks here in the seats to ask some questions or share some of the transitions that they're going through, some of the projects they might be managing, and maybe some of the communication or relationships aspects that are being affected. Kylash, you were talking a little bit about that software. I use the term overhaul.
Sure.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about how that impacts the communication and relationships in your team.
Sure. Well, I think the best way I can talk about this is just what I've learned from trying to manage this project and going through it. And we've talked a lot about communication. We talked a little bit about trying to minimize surprises, which to me is kind of getting better at planning. And that's where to somewhat compartmentalize everything that we're talking about to make it a little easier to understand in this topic of speaking with management. I like to use communication to group things like emotional intelligence, your own self-awareness, social intelligence, your writing skills, your oral communication. You can call these things soft skills, communication, whatever you call them. I got to be honest, I'm not one to sit up here and teach you how to do these kinds of things better. I think taking things like self-assessments for myself, going through business school was a very helpful thing. There's a lot of different classes out there, some that are free, that if you feel like you struggle in one of those areas, you can improve upon them. And they are, I do believe, a very central part of speaking with management and project management is really having that soft skill side defined. On the flip side, what I can speak about, which hopefully you can somewhat take away, is the other things that are required outside of the soft skills that I've realized are really helpful with the projects that I've been managing. One of which comes into trying to reduce the amount of surprises we're getting, and that's planning and really having a long-term view, whether it's the next week versus the next month, and having these large goals, visions, and what aren't as concrete, and breaking that down into tasks that can then be assigned to people, and having that short-term to long-term view, all while prioritizing your resources, right? So something that I've found people struggle with, or that surprises me sometimes, is that they'll get in front of management before ever thinking about how much time, labor hours, or money might go into the initiative that they're trying to bring up. And if you're not even asking yourself those 3 questions before you're getting in front of management, those are the first 3 questions management's probably going to ask you right when you get there. And if you haven't thought about that yet and you're figuring it out in front of them, politically, it's not going to look that good for you, and it's not the way to succeed in front of management. Another small caveat when speaking with management that I think is very important to understand is the respect for their own time. So this is a little separate from the resource time required to complete the project. Literally just the time it takes for you to stand in front of them is going to take part of their time and attention away from what they're responsible for. And as much as you might think you are busy, they are equally as busy, if not busier. So just like you don't want your time wasted by someone, they're not going to want their time wasted either. So if you go in front of them without going through these checklists in your head about how much money is this going to cost, how much time is it going to take, how much of our resources is it going to take, then you're not doing yourself a good justice. I think the third thing that Stan had brought up very earlier on in the conversation that I think is another big takeaway of this that is required to be successful in these very complex projects that require buy-in from management is being that translator. Is you're going to work with a number of subject matter experts, and you yourself are going to have to get to what I like to call an 80% level of understanding in almost everything. You're going to have to understand IT and budgeting and accounting and HR a little bit. And for myself, I need to understand labor unions a little bit because our mechanics are in a labor union, and there's some things I can and cannot ask them to do. And your organization is going to have other things. And if you really want to become that person that is in a decision-making role or impacting decision-making, you're going to have to be able to understand all the facets of the business and translate that to people that may or may not understand that, right? You're going to have to really bridge that gap between all these different silos in your organization and bring it together. Those are the things that I see as, so there's that communication aspect, the soft skills. We can talk about it more if the audience, wants to talk about it more. I personally don't have as much that I can explain on these things. I do believe that they're very important. But resource prioritization, having that long-term view, and being that translator are things that I think we really can dive deeper into, and hopefully we can all walk away with a little bit better understanding of that.
Yeah, I think those are some excellent points to clarify. Steve, you were wanting to build on.
I thought Kylash hit on something very important here, and we all need to take it back. When you're getting ready to talk to someone, you need to step into their shoes as much as you can and think about What am I probably going to get asked when I walk into that office? What are they going to want to know? What's important to them? What's important to their management? Everybody's got a boss. I don't care how high you go. There's always someone else that's responsible that takes the overarching command. And if you're not thinking of those and you walk in unprepared, that doesn't look good. It looks like you haven't done your homework, you don't know what you're talking about, and it introduces in their mind risk. And risk is the number one factor that's going to shut down your project. If there's a perceived risk, there's a perception that there's something that hasn't been thought of here, you may get sent back to do homework. You may get a no, we're going to go another direction, and a direction might not even be with you. So it's very important that you're thinking from their perspective. You may need to think, as we said earlier, from a financial perspective, if you're talking to your financial officer or the accounting department. But again, get in front of these people early and have conversations about, if we were considering a building project, what would be the most important things that I would need to gather for you when I bring the presentation so that I know you're comfortable that I've done my due diligence, and the questions that we ask during that conversation are follow-ups and not a why haven't you even considered this kind of a conversation. It's very important for that level to be comfortable that you're paying attention to their needs, right?
Yeah, that building remodel bullet point I put up there is probably an example that we could talk about, all the diligence that you and your team performed getting ready for some of those conversations.
Right. Right, and honestly, that ties into people space. It ties into, are you going to build a data center environment? What does it have to do? You know, different data centers do different things. Everybody kind of thinks of it as a box that holds computer equipment, and then there's battery backup and generators, and that's all important. But what's important to you? Is it uptime? Is it availability? We start having conversations with leadership about what are the costs of those kinds of components in a building like that, right? Generators are expensive, UPS, uninterruptible power supply modules, very expensive, batteries expensive. Generally, you're looking at about $1,000 a square foot for a well-built data center is kind of a rule of thumb. So when people start talking about, well, I want enough room I could play football on the raised floor, you time out. How many square foot is that times this? You really understand the scope of what we're discussing here. And you may need something that's resilient enough to survive F5 tornado. You may need something that's resilient enough that you can get to disaster recovery and business continuity mode at a second site someplace that perhaps is leased. But you can't go in with a grand plan that only you came up with. The communication is super important. We were talking yesterday about RACI chart, RACI, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. If you're not using those when you're preparing to talk to leadership, you're honestly shortchanging yourself. Who's responsible? Is it me? Is it the CIO that's actually responsible for the data center? I mean, I'm responsible to do the work, but who's responsible to substantiate that to the board of directors or even to our customer base that ultimately may be paying for that, depending on what division of the workforce you're in? Who's accountable to actually make it happen? Who needs to be consulted? And that goes up and down. You've got a bunch of users in an office environment. You want those folks to be happy. You want to have good associate retention. Hiring can be a big play in that when you're looking at trying to woo people from other companies, because they will seriously consider, what do I have now versus what am I going to get there? Bring someone in for an interview, you give them the tour of the office, and they go, okay, now. Right? You don't want to be in that spot. You're competing with other people. Whether you realize it or not, it is always a competition. You're trying to get associates in. You need good, solid people. You need folks that are going to want to stay for a long time. Figure out what it is that they want. Figure out it is what the company wants. Mesh those two together. This is your proposal, right? And then lastly, of course, informed. Who needs to know about all this? People that the change is happening to, obviously. Folks that are going to have to do work to support it. Anytime you change your seating around, of course, structured cabling comes into play. whoever does your field services or your associate PC services, maybe you do internal moves, maybe people move themselves. I don't know, but that's things you have to figure out. It's all very important. And it debates a lot of fears when you're communicating up front and you're making sure that people know what is coming, because the biggest fear that anybody has is change. And when we're going to go change the environment, whether it be build a building, remodel a building, put in new software, right? It's all change. I just got Windows 10. Hate it. Nothing against Windows personally, but I was really used to the old system, right? Now I've got to learn something new. You have introduced change in my life. We all say, yeah, I love change. We don't like change. Let's be honest.
Stan, you're going through some changes with your organization, that transition general services towards more of an FM approach. Do you want to talk about how fun that change can be and exciting?
Yeah, it can be exciting, that's for sure. There's one aspect of language that I'd like to make a point of, because I think it's very, very important. We've talked already about communication and how important that is. But I mentioned earlier about if you're communicating to other technical people in your organization or your clients or whatever, to try and not talk FM, try and talk their language. But there's also another dimension of communication. How many of you have ever received an email and the written word in the email has been misinterpreted as to what the message was? I've seen it many, many times. So the language that we use needs to be appropriate for the type of communication we're trying to make. If somebody from Baltimore is talking to somebody from Baltimore, the odds are the communication, the verbal, the written, probably will work okay. If somebody from Baltimore is talking to somebody from Scotland, the language that they use might not be appropriate in that I might not understand what it is they're trying to tell me, because the language, the actual words that we use will be different. I had a very good conversation yesterday with a colleague here from New York when we were talking about a hood or a boot of a car. They mean the same thing. In the UK, we call them boots. Over here, you call them hoods. So if he talked to me about somebody in a hood, I'd think he'd be talking about somebody that's a drug addict or something, you know. I work a lot abroad, and I'm very conscious of the language because I'm communicating with people whose first language is not in English. So you try and be very careful about how you communicate. And the first time I ever worked with a group of people from Europe who all spoke very, very good English, who could all read and write English, the problem wasn't that I was talking to a French or a German person. The problem was the meaning of the words that I used meant something completely different to them. Now, we're talking here about how we influence top management. Some of your top management might not be from the US. Some of your top management might be from Texas and you're from Baltimore. Be very, very aware that that kind of communication can be very easily misinterpreted. So you need to be aware of who you're communicating with, not just with the technical nuances, but also with the cultural nuances that can really change very much what the message is that you're trying to give. General services to FM. I'm currently working with an organization in the Middle East who's transforming their whole organization from a general services, which really was only responsible for cleaning and transportation services. And they want to become an FM organization. And the first place we had to start was the language and interpretation of what did we mean by maintenance. Now, we wouldn't probably think that's something that we had to be careful about how we explained it, but their perception of maintenance was completely different than mine. And it can be as basic as that. And I attended a training course given in the Middle East for people in the Middle East, and I noticed that it was done in English, not in Arabic, and I noticed they spent 80% of the training analyzing the words, and then the 20% was what the training course was all about. So they had to get the fundamentals clear before they could actually communicate the message. And I think when we put that in the context of top management, whether it's those technical nuances, whether it's the cultural, our language and our interpretation of the language is critical to getting the message across.
Thank you. So I was just going to ask if there are any questions, and look at that. Microphone's coming your way.
I've never been a CEO, but I got to believe that there's no CEO taking a session on how to communicate with facilities folks. So, you know, we talk about going to top management for requests, and let's just say, for example, we want a new computer software system for work order management and stuff like that. So, of course, we can go to their angle and say this new package would communicate directly with your accounting software, so that would help you guys a lot, and it'll communicate. Sure. It'll give us these reports, which will help you show savings and stuff. How can we subtly educate top management for the things that it'll solve for us? Like, how do we try to make them aware? Because I would think that a lot of times top management figures were just the fix-it guys or the maintenance guys, and as you get more sophisticated and you want to do more planning and stuff, I mean, how can we make them more sympathetic to our needs and like subtly educate them on how we want to raise our bar?
I can take this one. So because we're going through the same exact transition, right? We have a work order management system, very, very basic, manages our preventative maintenance and service orders, customer trouble calls, doesn't do too much asset management, right? So I'm in the same boat as you. Let me ask you this. What does your the company or organization that you're a part of, you don't have to get too into it, but what does your management really like to see? Do they like to see their profits go up? Do they like to see employee satisfaction really high? Do they like to see their customers very happy? What is it that?
Yeah, I think you want good customer service. We're very customer focused, but also they want to see good return on investment. But what we kind of want to see is we don't want to run everything to failure. We want to get the stuff out of the facility before it fails, so that we don't have breakdowns and long repair delays, like a HVAC unit that has to be built on location and is going to take 3 or 4 months to get put together. It's hard for them to see that it's working now. I'm not going to spend $80,000 or $120,000 to get this thing fixed if it's not broken yet. And so to try to kind of get them to the next level to say that we can see it failing and we want to fix it before it fails, even though it might not fail for 5 years or 4 years or 3 years, we should do it now and plan for it, to kind of, I guess, make them more sympathetic to the problems we want to solve that they don't really see that we're having, you know what I mean?
So are your customers, your tenants, are they one and the same? Are you completing work orders to make sure that your tenants, is that how you're?
Basically, it's with Gold's Gym. So
Sure.
We lease the space generally, and then our customers are our members, our paying customers.
So we have a similar kind of model, right?
Yeah.
Our tenants are our customers, right? And
Exactly.
that's one thing that I've seen as one of our biggest reasons why we should get a new system is, hey, look, if I can anticipate something to go down before it goes down, or if I can have a better software system to have parts on stock so that just the downtime is reduced. Customer satisfaction automatically is going to go up if their downtime is reduced. And our management gets a lot more phone calls about things not working in the building rather than anything dealing with costs. So if we run the building well, then we're good, right? And management doesn't get the calls. Especially if you had an example of when something went down, when you couldn't get it fixed because you didn't have the software that could, execute the kinds of workflows and asset management you're trying to accomplish. If you have an example, and even on top of that, if you had like emails or phone calls from your customers saying, hey, look at all these people that complained because this thing was down, And you guys, one of our biggest things is keeping our customers happy. If they say no to that, then maybe one of their biggest things isn't keeping the customers happy. Maybe it is more monetary based, and maybe then you have to approach it more in a dollars and cents kind of way. But when I asked you, what does your management care about, I think the first thing you did say was customer satisfaction, which is exactly how it is for us, is that we got to keep our tenants happy. So the biggest thing that I've really hit on is, look, if we can minimize downtime, customer satisfaction is going to go up. And especially in our case, it's like patient safety is going up and animal safety is going up, right? So it's even another level of criticality that emphasizes it. But to me, if I'm in management position in Gold's Gym and my facility guy comes to me and says, hey, this software is going to keep our gyms running more often and therefore tenants don't have to exit because it's off, right? If an HVAC goes down, I assume you got to exit, you got to turn the building off, right? Yeah, or that, right? So there's redundancy, and sure, yeah. But
Stan?
I'd like to answer your question in a slightly different way, complementary what's just been said. But if I'm in your seat trying to convince the CEO, my strategy would be the communication should be about what's in it for him, not solving your problem. What's it going to do for him? And if you approach that communication in that way, I think you're now talking his language. You're now explaining something to him that he will relate to. Now, if I'm the CEO and you're asking me, my question will be, why? And if you don't have a good answer, then go and start again,
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes down to that organizational alignment, right? What are the organizational goals, the top priorities? And if it's tenant satisfaction, and if that's in the form of more membership and revenue, I can see that being important.
Yeah, and I would share that even though the relationship may be contentious at times, the CEO needs you. And they expect you to do your job, and they expect you to come forward with the why, the how, and the how much. We're expected to look at life cycle replacement. We should be cleaning out systems ahead of when they are dirty. With regard to, we were talking yesterday about air conditioning, and you don't necessarily change filters on a schedule. You're changing them on when are they dirty, right? And that's a cost savings thing, but is it in line with what the goals of the company are? Is it in line with the expectations of the CEO? Is it in line with what your customer needs look like? So there's a line between saving money and being aligned with what the company wants. And you have to find that, and that comes through asking questions. What is it you're looking for from me? What is it you're looking for from my department? How are we expected to provide for the needs of the company? Do you expect me to plan long term? Do you want me to make sure that we have a plan of equipment replacement on a life cycle? Do we do predictive, or do we just fix it when it's down? If we just fix it when it's down, we're into surprise mode, and I know you don't like that, so I want to get ahead of that, and I want to help the company be better, increase customer satisfaction, whether it's individual, whether it's internal people that sit in an office space, or if it's gymnasium membership. You want people to come to the gym, you're going to have to make them happy to be there. So that's your number one goal and objective. What do I do in facility management to make sure that our customers are happy so they want to come back and they want to keep spending money here, because that keeps me employed and that makes me happy.
That's great. Anybody else with a question right now? Steve, you were just talking a little bit about the conversation yesterday where we talked about things that should be done according to factory install or manufacturer instructions, in the way maybe things that are done based more along the organization. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those decisions and how you get to them? Is it consensus with your team? Is it something that you put forward first and then gather feedback on?
Generally, I like to sit down with the entire group in any project, whether it's a software or a hardware install, and figure out what are we trying to do. And you may find things that aren't necessarily made for this application, but you can use them there in software products. We recently did a project where we did a lighting system, and it's power over Ethernet, which is not necessarily new, but there's a lot of players out there in the market that are trying to come in and get going. And we tried a system once upon a time that the vendor decided not to make anymore, and we wound up stuck with that. But how can you apply that otherwise? Well, it has the ability to take sensing from temperature and humidity, occupancy sensors, start tying that together, and you can use it to do things like manage your space better. Conference rooms. How many people always have a need for more conference rooms? But you walk around the building, and how many of those conference rooms are actually occupied? I see a lot of yeah out there, right? We don't need more space. We need to manage our space better. So there's applications you can get that tie space occupancy sensors to scheduling systems. You don't show up for the meeting in 5 minutes. The system returns your room as available, and someone can use it. You do a recurring meeting. You miss it once, I get it, things happen. You miss it twice in a row, system returns your room to the availability for the population. A lot of cross applications that you can do, that maybe you take a product that wasn't necessarily intended to do something, but you can make it work in another area, and you've actually added value to that for your company, right? So it was just lighting, right? That's where we started. We had a power over Ethernet lighting system, and we were going to save money on electricity because it was all LED, and you had the one conversion at the switch level. That's fantastic, but always try to think bigger. How much more can I do with this particular system, device, service?
Stan, that makes me think of some of our conversation yesterday. We talked about more of a cleaning application, but how some IoT and some smart technologies are being used to even get more specific in those savings and in those practices.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about IoT technology and what's happening there, but in FM, I believe the future for us all in FM is inextricably linked with technology now. The fourth industrial revolution, if you haven't heard about it, it's happening right now. And I don't know if any of you follow, there's an organization called the World Economic Forum that meets every year in Davos in Switzerland, and all the leaders and scientists and entrepreneurs of the world get together and what's the future? Well, one of the outputs I need to tell you is that by 2025, 50% of the jobs that we do today will not exist. So that's a thought to take away. And the thing about that, when you put that into the context of FM, that's already happening, and IoT and AI is now with us. It's real. We as an organization are already doing it for some of our clients, and it will transform how we deliver facilities management. Some of the examples that we were chatting about yesterday, the soap dispensers in the washroom tell you when they need more soap. It doesn't need a cleaner to go and look at it. We don't clean washrooms until, say, 5 people have actually used them. The IT will tell you that. The building, the autonomous building is coming. It's very, very important for us not to resist the change that Steve was talking about earlier, but embrace it, and embrace it in a positive sense where this kind of technology is going to give us the knowledge that we don't have today. That knowledge will allow us to manage things like the space planning and the use of meeting rooms, etc., the cleaning regimes, the maintenance regimes. That is where we have a great opportunity to add real value to the organizations that we serve that will improve our status. It will enhance our professionalism as facilities managers. It will show that we are embracing change for the better. And 50% of the jobs might disappear, but it's because we're going to be doing things differently. And so it's not doom and gloom that they're going to disappear completely. We will have to reskill. We will have to realign who we are and what we do in our organizations. For me, I think that's a huge positive, because for me, some of us have been striving for 30-odd years to raise FM as the strategically important business-critical discipline in every organization in this country. And I believe that's what we can be. The challenge is ours. The challenge is not the people that we serve, the top management that we're communicating to. It's about us making ourselves relevant to those organizations and those business leaders. And I think technology is going to give us a fantastic opportunity to do that. But, and there is always a but, we need to be competent. We need to have the education and training and the skills to be able to grasp that opportunity. And I think, for me, the future of FM is quite exciting. And the fact that you're all here, attending this conference and gaining more knowledge and ideas, because none of us have got all the answers to it, is a very positive thing as well. And very encouraging, I have to say.
I agree wholeheartedly. Great. We do have time for a couple questions before we wrap up. So get those hands up if you've got a question.
Hi. I actually have two questions. The first one is about bureaucracy. This has happened. I've had to deal with people who were invested in a particular policy or regulation, and they saw their role as a brake, and they didn't necessarily understand the technical aspects. So how do you overcome that?
There's probably a flippant, quick answer to that, but maybe not the right one to give, you know.
Do you need this person to buy into what you're trying to do?
Well, how do you do that?
So I'll tell you where I would start with that. And let's talk about Stan's comments on the soap dispenser. So I want to buy soap dispensers that tell me whenever they need filled. Okay, great. So you want me to spend money, and I'm in the CEO role now. You're asking for money for this. You want me to spend money to get out of work because you don't want to go check the soap dispenser. No, I want to return value to the company, and now you can use the money we're not spending on housekeeping to invest in another technology and start returning cash back. That's how you have to rotate the conversation. That's how you have to look at it. You've got to get a different perspective that says, this thing that I want to do adds value. This thing helps the company. This thing supports the goals and objectives that we're all trying to achieve together.
The second question has to do with surprises, and it's actually happened in my work. We have a critical equipment. They get taken over by somebody else. A few months later, you get the nice letter from the new owner saying, as of this date, we no longer are supporting this product. So how do you go back to management and say, oh, by the way, these things that we desperately need, we can't use anymore as of this date, and we need to spend very soon a big chunk of money to replace the whole thing?
I think that's exactly how you do it. It's a fact. Sometimes that happens, and you know, it's always good to be able to go in with some options. So do a little research before you go in there, and here's what I recommend we replace it with. But I mean, yeah, that's exactly the conversation. The long and the short of it is, we really need this thing and we can't get it anymore. This is what I recommend we replace it with, and you know, it's going to cost some money. So how can we figure out how we do some creative financing and we get to where we need to be, because I need to continue to support you.
The issue might exist upstream a little bit during the procurement process if there's a way to vet. I know it's really hard with some of these specialty pieces of equipment to know whether the manufacturer is going to continue to support it after a certain date, but there may be a little bit more research you can do before you're actually purchasing it to somewhat reassure yourself that it will be supported.
I'd like to comment on both your questions very briefly. I did some work with a university a few years back, and we wanted to change the financial processing of all the suppliers, etc., because it was very bureaucratic. And I had the fresh pair of eyes. I said, this is crazy the way we're managing and administering this. And I said, why don't we change it? And the director of estate said, there is no chance that the Director of Finance will change anything. Not interested in what we do. So I said, okay, that's fine. So I found out who this guy was. I happened to make sure I maneuvered myself to have a coffee with this guy, just to say hello, meet him. What are you doing here? You know, I'm here trying to look at these idiots in the Estates Department and see how inefficient they're working, etc. And then I invited myself to go and have a meeting with them to explain if the Estates Department did A, B, C, D, that would make your life a lot easier, would it not? And of course he agreed with me. So we changed it. Yeah. So it was about doing the research, it was about talking his languages, about what's in it for him. And he bought it, and it all changed. It was very, very simple. But easy for somebody outside the politics of the organisation to see and do that than it was for people inside the organisation. And the last thing I'd like to say about your redundant equipment is, and this is a sales pitch for ISO standards. How many have you read an ISO standard in facilities management? You know, there's a few hands going up. That's more than normal. We're creating a whole family of ISO standards for you. And one of them is called ISO 41012, 41012. And it's a standard about strategic procurement and FM agreements, how to establish FM agreements with your contractors, etc. Or even establish an FM agreement with your team and the organisation that employs you. Okay? It's applicable to both. And these standards are templates. They don't give you the answers, but they give you a methodology about how to be proactive to avoid that kind of problem with redundancy of equipment that you're procuring, or the problem of misperception between you and your organisation about what's a measure of success, why are you there, what is the organisational requirements from the FM team. Trust me, folks, these things have been developed by 46 countries, and we bring all that knowledge and experience together. And the US has been a very proactive participant in that process. But for some reason, most of the FM community don't even know they exist, never mind read them and use them. I would recommend you go and have a look and see if they are applicable to you in your role and your position today, and I think you might find them very, very useful.
And we'll see what we can do to expose our audience to that. Now, we are at the 9 o'clock mark, but I'm going to do, even though baseball season is starting, we're going to use a football term. We're doing the 2-minute drill. I'm going to run to as many of you as possible, and I'm going to ask one of our panelists to take each question and answer it as quickly as possible. 2 minutes starts now.
Hi, my name is Kimmy, and I have a question. How does one encourage the C-suite to consider the end user? I'm a nurse, and oftentimes the CEO takes into consideration their board or their stakeholders rather than the end user when purchasing equipment, when purchasing software. And I feel that the end user, which is usually me, is not taken into consideration and is stuck with a product that is cumbersome, not user-friendly, etc.
Okay, one panelist answers, and I'm going on to the next one. How do we handle that end user issue?
Okay, I'll give you a very quick answer.
Good.
Scare them.
Good, got it.
Scare them. Talk about the implications of that not working, and they have to stand in front of the press and explain why.
I would say if they continue to neglect the end user, the company probably won't stay successful long term if they're really that bad at it. On the flip side, if you ever are able to sit down with him or her or someone close to them and actually show them what you or someone in your position has to go through on a daily basis, something that I've found is that management seldom actually goes into the software systems that they purchase. They buy them and they actually never use them themselves and never actually realize how it works.
Yes, quickly. So how successful have you been to explain to the C-suite the impact of teleworking on your FM, i.e., you know, you got 40-something% occupancy rate and you want to save money?
I personally can't answer that because the government has a telework policy that had been enacted before me. I don't know about you guys.
We have work from home policies, but they honestly have no control over them. I don't have a good answer for you, I'm sorry.
Well, I think we hit as many as we could today. I want to thank everybody who stayed for that little quick question and answer. I want to thank our panel, Steve, Stan, Kylash, awesome work.